Well, welcome back to the Head in the Clouds podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Romeo, and it's been a while. It has been probably 2 years, I'm guessing, since I've sat behind this mic and done a podcast like this. And I was talking to some friends of mine saying, I think I'm going to reboot the podcast, and they were all very supportive. My wife was very supportive. And so I think if you've joined with me for a while, if you've followed along the Head in the Clouds podcast over the years, you've gotten to know me and a little bit about my story and gotten to hear some interviews with some friends of mine who I spent some time on the road with. But for those of you, this is your first time jumping into the podcast. My name is Ryan Romeo. I've had a very interesting sort of season that I've just gone through, and part of the reason why I couldn't do the podcast for the last couple of years is because of this season that I was just in, which I'm going to talk about. But I am an author, I'm a local church pastor, I'm a father of 3 teenagers whom I love very much. Teenage years are not for the faint at heart when it comes to parenting. But I have been really wanting to reboot this podcast. When I started it, it was 2019, I think, when I started the Head in the Clouds podcast. And at the time, I had a book contract with Zondervan, and they said, would you be willing to start a podcast to just kind of talk about the new book and all of that? And I said, maybe. And they said, you don't need to do it for too long. You just gotta like talk through some of the book content, and then after the book's launch, you can do whatever you want. And so I said, okay. So I started in my closet, which this is a little bit of an upgrade. This is my small office that I have here. But I started in my closet with a microphone and a little desk from IKEA. And I sat in my dark closet because it was soundproof as best I could get. And I ran my podcast out of there for years. And I launched the book, and I decided, I want to keep doing this. So I kept doing the Head in the Clouds podcast for quite a while. I think I hit over 100 episodes, and I really, really enjoyed it. But behind the scenes, I had been running with Outcry. Outcry was a tour that my friend Shane and I started in 2015. We just celebrated our 10-year anniversary of the launch of Outcry, which is wild. But Outcry was a worship tour that I ran for quite a while, for many years. We did 90 cities. We had about a million people attend Outcry. It was a pretty wild season in my life. And but the podcast was just one of these things that for me was really life-giving. It was something I really enjoyed doing. I loved the opportunity to interview people that I looked up to, interview people that I had spent time on the road with. And so it was a real great outlet for me. But around 2022, I think, I started to realize that things were shifting and changing in my life. At the time, I was a pastor at a church here in downtown Phoenix, in central Phoenix. And I knew that our lead pastor at the time, David Stockton, he was going to be taking a 1-year sabbatical. And after a while, a lot of conversation with elders and with him and a lot of prayer, it really felt right to us that I would be stepping in and taking over the church for that year that he was gone. And so for the year leading up to that, I was podcasting and doing some other stuff. And I realized if I was going to lead a church, I really needed to devote more time to it. So the lead up to David leaving was about a year of real preparation and getting ready and getting a little sabbatical rest before I jumped into it. And that year before was kind of me ramping up my leadership, him kind of ramping down his leadership as he was getting ready to go to Ireland. And that's where he spent a year doing missions work in Ireland. And so in that lead up, I realized I just don't have the bandwidth that I used to. And so, unfortunately, the Head in the Clouds podcast was one of the casualties of that season. And it was right and it was good. It was really what I felt like the Lord was saying I needed to do to make space to be able to lead well. And Living Streams, it's not a huge church, but a church of around 1,000 and pretty big staff and a preschool that's attached to it. And so there was a lot of moving parts when I was stepping into it. Then I was the lead pastor for a year, which taught me a lot. And a lot of this podcast, as we move forward, we're going to be unpacking some of that. I have a lot of opinions, having spent time on the road with some major celebrity pastors, which I have a lot to say about that. Not a huge fan of that in this season. I think there's a lot that's changing. We'll talk about that. But then leading on a local church level, leading a church like Living Streams for a year, and seeing that transition to me in leadership, running the ship for a year. And then the next year after that was me kind of ramping down and David ramping back up. So within a 3-year period, I experienced transitioning a church to myself, leading it, and then transitioning it to somebody else. And honestly, it was a very difficult 3 or 4 years. There was a lot of identity crisis that hit me and things that I had written about. I mean, the Head in the Clouds book, I talk about identity and all of these things. And that season, I think, put me to the test more than any other season in my life. And within that sort of, if we could call it a 4-year span, because Outcry stopped and my book came out, but then that sort of part of my life was winding down. Then lead pastor part of me was winding up. And then as it was winding down, as David came back, we reintegrated him into staff. I think I hit a season, and I told a lot of my friends, I think I was a lot more tired than I knew I was tired, but I was a lot more tired than I thought I was. And also in that span, I finished my master's in theology, and so there's all these just moving parts in my life. And so as all of the dust is kind of settled, now I stepped down from Living Streams. I felt like the Lord was saying, step down, and it's not because I hated anybody or any of that. It was just it felt like the Lord was saying, well done, good and faithful servant. You led this congregation through all these changes, and now it's time for you to take a step back. And so I resigned, stepped out, had about 3 months to try to refigure out my life. Some of it was me going, gosh, maybe I'm not supposed to do ministry. And any of us that do ministry on a vocational level, we have that sitting in the back of our mind. There's always that feeling, and I've talked to so many pastors. It's like, okay, Lord, you've led me here. I'm leading. I feel called to lead. But if there's any other thing that comes up, let me know, Lord, because this is really hard. And I remember somebody that was on staff with us at Living Streams. She had been a founding member of LifeLock, and so she saw LifeLock kind of grow. She got to, go and ring the bell for, I don't know, the NASDAQ or something like that. I'm not very well versed in that world. And she then went on to be an executive at Charles Schwab, and so she was somebody who worked really, really hard. At some point, she felt called to jump in and join our team on the executive team, and she came in. And the first year that she was working there, I remember she looked at us on the team and she said, "This is a lot harder than I thought it was going to be." She said, "I know, from the outside, you think, oh, well, pastors are sermon prepping and taking people out to lunch and coffee and, and their hours aren't necessarily as stringent as other people." And she said, "I have completely changed my tune." She said, "There is a spiritual aspect to this job that I didn't understand, a spiritual dynamic and battle that I didn't understand. There's an emotional component to this job. I mean, there's counseling involved. There's difficult decisions that are involved. She said the emotional toll of this job is way harder than I thought it was going to be. And for any of us sitting in the room, we thought, oh, thank God somebody's saying that, because you sit on staff, a lot of people are like, oh, in the real world, when you got to really work hard, and I think a lot of people don't understand the kind of weight that it carries. So as I stepped out of that sort of transition period, multiple transition periods in ministry, I thought, Lord, is this it? I thought maybe business, maybe something that, would maybe be a little bit more lucrative, things like that. And I thought, and it was a fun exercise for me for a while. And then I met with a church leader of a church in downtown Phoenix who was looking for somebody to step in. And I called my wife afterward and I said, all right, after laying my whole life on the table again and saying, Lord, do you want me to still do this? I felt like the Lord said, yes, I want you to keep doing ministry. So I've been on staff at a church called New City Church in downtown Phoenix, been loving it. It's been very therapeutic for me in a lot of ways. But it's been a lot of these sort of transitions in life. And any of you who have gone through transitions, when you change jobs, when relationships change or you change location, these are things that cause a lot of stress on people. And I've been going through that for years. And now as I've come out of that season, I think the dust really has settled a lot emotionally for me. And I realized I have a lot of things sitting in my head. My head is in the clouds. The intro to the podcast, I don't know what we're going to do with the intro to the podcast. I think I'm going to continue to work with my producer from before, and we're going to kind of rework some of it. But in the old podcast, the intro was "Now to the man whose head is constantly in the clouds, Ryan Romeo." And it is true. My head is always in the clouds. I'm always thinking about what's coming in culture, what's going on, what does the church need to do, what do we need to do, what are some lessons we've learned from the past, but what are some rules that we need to break in the future? All of these things help me to tick. I realized I need an outlet to talk about these sort of things. And so as I've been talking and processing through with my wife and people in my life that are really close to me, I've realized this is something that is really important for me to kind of pull back off the ground. And I have spent so much of my life and time over the last 10 years coaching people, talking to people about what does it take to take a dream off the ground. If God's given you a dream, what does it take to get it off the ground? And that was my last book. I probably have it here. Oh, here it is. Oh, jeez. Okay, if you're not watching the video form of this, you don't know what just happened, but I almost just messed myself up. Head in the Clouds. This book I wrote for creatives and people with their head in the clouds and dreaming, head in the clouds, feet on the ground. And so I've been thinking about this next season, and I have a book that's rolling around in my head. I think I'm going to start really trying to pull that together, really talking about the next season of the church and church leadership and what's required on a heart level to really hold it well, especially on the back end of all the kind of church failures that we're seeing in leadership. And this podcast, I think, gives me a real ability to kind of process this through with all of you that are along for the ride. And if you are interested in, hey, I want to know what's coming in the future. We have AI going on. I mean, I think 2025 is going to be one of those years that we look back and we go, gosh, remember those good old days before AI was this insane thing? It's already up on the upswing, but this is one of the most disruptive technologies that we've ever seen, and it's affecting so many things in the church, and I really can't wait to talk about all of these things. I'm going to bring on some guests as well. I'll be kind of doing the same thing that I was doing before, which is sometimes it's a monologue like this. Sometimes it's me just processing and talking through some things that I'm learning and talking through the things that we see coming on the horizon. But I'm also going to supplement that and connect with other church leaders that I've worked with over the years that I think can speak really well to that. So I've been talking to some people that I was on tour with and rebooting some of that. Some of them are in transition. Some of them are really living out all the things that are going on in the church and that are changing. And on top of that, I think for people that are listening that feel like they have big things in their mind and they don't always have an audience for that. If their head is in the clouds and you're thinking through what's coming in the future and what should I do to kind of pivot my life or my church or my ministry around something that's new, then this is kind of the podcast for you. I also think that it's for people that aren't in ministry and that really do care about these big ideas. Some of the church leaders I've been talking to lately, one of them, he was on a podcast called The Telepathy Tapes, and so there's things like that he's so interesting, and I can't wait to bring that interview to you guys. But he is so incredibly interesting and talking about mysterious things in the world that really the church has shied away from in a lot of ways. But I think this is a brand new season of Christian content. What do I mean by that? I mean, we need to, as Christian content creators, we need to be looking out on the horizon and having these sort of like long form conversations about things that are going on in the world. And that means leadership changes. That means looking at church leadership that's failing left and right, and not just looking at the sin, the salacious sin that brought the downturn of that ministry, but also what were the precursors to that? What were the things in the church as we're coming into a new season? We're coming out of the seeker-sensitive movements. We've been out of them for a while, but a lot of churches are slow and reticent to make these changes. Or they just learn these tools and they don't know what to do when the tools stop working. There's all of those things that are going on. At the same time, culture is getting so interested in conversations like AI and aliens, telepathy, and things like that. I think these are such good opportunities for content creators to not just engage into a narrow niche, but to talk about what are the things that our culture is talking about, and what does Jesus have to say about those? What does the church have to say about that? How do we engage in the next generation? How do we hand them a really healthy church that's not white-knuckling style, that's not white-knuckling how we've done things in the past, but really looking at the strength of, and my next podcast is going to be about this, Gen Z and what's coming with Gen Z. And there's a lot of things that, honestly, in the church, we've been kind of crusty and out of touch with what's going on. And yes, there are a lot of things to critique. Yes, there are a lot of things that are scary, but there's a lot of things that are exciting, like the growth of Gen Z in the church, and especially Gen Z men, which is so interesting. This is a moment for the church where everything is shifting, everything's changing, all the rules are getting kind of thrown out the window, and we have a real opportunity to kind of talk about and bring Jesus into areas that have never been areas that we've been allowed into in pop culture. Now, when you listen to Joe Rogan talking about AI, it's so funny because at some point they have to have a theological conversation, because this brings up this whole idea of what are humans and what's our purpose here in life. And if there is like godlike powers of AI, what is God? Who is he? And these are conversations that I think secular humanists are woefully inadequate to have these in sort of meaningful ways. They're running out of words to use. Church, this is the time where we get to engage in that. So this podcast, and this is kind of the intro podcast, but this is the sort of whetting the appetite of what's coming. We're going to be talking about all these things that just sit in my head. My head is always in the clouds. And so I'm thinking through all of these little pieces, and we get to have real conversations together. And my hope is that there is a real conversation piece of this podcast. And I'm going to try to integrate that a little bit better. I think in the past I was not so great at being strategic with any of this. That's just not my gifting necessarily. But one thing that I do really care about is people emailing me, commenting on, and now we're going to be on YouTube, being able to comment on it and potentially doing some lives and things like that. I want some interaction. I really want to know what you're thinking, what you're sensing. There are the prophetic voices in the church that really need to kind of get louder in this season. Prophetic voices that are seeing things on the horizon, Jeremiah-like voices that are seeing good things on the horizon, real challenges on the horizon. And we, in the kind of prophetic community of the church, need to be able to speak and give some voice to that. And so that is a lot of my hope with this podcast. I think part of me having my head in the clouds really is a God-given gift, and where you'd put it in kind of the fivefold ministry in Ephesians would be in the prophetic gifting. And that prophetic gifting is beautiful, it's wonderful, but it's very misunderstood. Oftentimes it's kind of a lonely place to be. So if you find yourself in that place where you're like, gosh, where can we have these sort of conversations? I really want this platform to be that place. So I'm going to be doing weekly podcasts from here on out. They're going to be on YouTube, Spotify, all those places. I'm talking with my producer before to just kind of dovetail into the previous platform that I had with Head in the Clouds. And we're going to get this thing off the ground. We're going to get this thing rolling. And I'm so excited. And anybody who's listening, I'm grateful for any of you that are listening. So what's coming? So we're going to be doing those podcasts. I'm going to be working on my next book. Just a little bit of a teaser. My operating title for my next book is called The Fallacy of the King. And I'm going to be talking a lot more about this, but I do think there are, when we're looking at the church and church leadership failure, there's these kind of socially acceptable sins. And honestly, I'll tell some stories. I may not use names, but I'll tell some stories of being on the road with some of these sort of celebrity pastors. Some of them were really surprising how down to earth they were, some of them not so much. But one in particular, before there was a major crash in his life, I could see the things that were the precursors to that. So a lack of accountability, celebrity culture, and not just the sort of celebrity culture that the leaders themselves promote, which they do. They have a lot of blame to place on their own shoulders, no doubt. But I came to realize there were a lot of people around them that wanted them to play that part as well. And so I think if we're going to push back on celebrity culture, if we're going to push back on sort of the personality-driven church, we have to take a look at ourselves and say, why do we keep elevating those kind of leaders? I think in my life, I've always been a weird leader. I went to art school. I never really wanted to lead in the church, but that was something that the Lord just kind of brought. And so I think I was just kind of the reluctant leader. Because what I saw as church leadership, I looked at them and I said, well, I'm not that. I'm not the tall, handsome, articulate, powerful guy that walks into a room and everyone's like, oh, that guy's in charge. I've never been that kind of leader. I'm okay sitting in the background if that's what's needed. So the times that I was stepping forward and leading, it was kind of reluctant. And so I felt like I have had a little bit of a different view of leadership. But now I think this is the season where those kind of leaders are the leaders that are required to lead us to the next phase of the church and the next phase of bringing Jesus into whatever sphere of influence that you have in your life. And I think that that's tipping, that's changing. I just saw a report that came out that said officially millennials are the number one generation that's in leadership right now. Take away two key areas, the church and government. So we could see that happening, but in the business world, in the nonprofit world, millennials are taking leadership and management, and they are the number one leaders. They just surpassed Gen X in that. So there's a lot of generational shifting and a lot of things that millennials got a hard time about, and there's some things that I think, maybe we deserve a little bit. I guess I'm a millennial. I was born in 1982, so I'm kind of an elder millennial. but I've kind of had a foot in Gen X, a foot in millennial world, and I've always worked with baby boomer pastors. So I feel like I've had this sort of view of all the generations. We're going to talk about this a lot next podcast, but I see all these changes happening, and I think this is the time for the reluctant leader. This is the time for the leader that's like, gosh, I really care about people and a lot less about, P&L sheets and, and productivity tools. Those things are important. They can help a lot. There's a lot of people talking about those, but there's a heart posture change in leadership that's coming, and we need to know what kind of leadership to celebrate in the future. That's the thing that we have to really put first and foremost. And so this is a conversation that this generation really needs to start having. And any voices that are going to be talking about that, I think, are really important. And so I'm trying to find as many people as I can that speak to that change and that shift in leadership. So Head in the Clouds podcast is rebooted officially. Here's episode number 1. We're going to be talking through a lot of things in the upcoming weeks. So if this is something that you're interested in, subscribe, jump onto this. My main platform is Instagram. I started a TikTok, which makes me feel old, but honestly, I think TikTok is a really great place for conversation. So some of this is going to be popping up on TikTok. And so Ryan Romeo on all of those platforms is where you could kind of find me, connect with me on that. If there are some things that you really want this podcast to be talking about, please share them. Let me know. But some of the subjects we're going to be tackling in the coming weeks are scandals in the church and transparency and what's required of church leadership in the future. We're going to be talking about the next generation a lot. So are we deconstructing, or is there revival happening? There's a lot of real signs that revival is happening. So what does that mean for the church? What kind of changes are happening when it comes to celebrity pastors, when it comes to authenticity in leadership? And so we're going to be talking about addiction in ministry, things like that, and the future of preaching, the future of shepherding, the breakdown of the kind of CEO pastor, and what does it mean in the next season, as well as what things are changing in the worship world, all these sort of things that are going on, as well as anything that's interesting to me. So it's my podcast, and I need to lean into the things that I'm passionate about. So that pastor I was talking about, that was on the telepathy tapes, we're going to have some very interesting conversation and say, okay, what kind of things, what kind of mysteries are there out there that the church is not engaging in? That's not necessarily good or bad. It's just something that maybe as pastors, we need to have enough humility to kind of hold it lightly and say, gosh, I don't know. Let's have a conversation about it. And what would be the biblical framework around these sort of things? So these are all episodes that are coming. I'm very excited about it. I genuinely feel like for the first time in a few years, I've got some wind at my back, and I'm feeling real excitement about doing this. So if you're with me, thank you so much for joining. So jump in, subscribe, all of those sort of things. I'll be putting out some shorts that are going on social media and things like that to kind of whet the appetite of it. But we're officially launching the website today. So thank you so much for joining. So grateful for all of you that are listening. I'm so excited. My name is Ryan Romeo. Thank you for joining the Head in the Clouds podcast. Until next time.